Thursday. It is Pushing the Limits. What a busy news day we have in store for you. We got some great guests lined up for you today. I want to remind everybody, if you're watching on the Occupy Democrats Network, please click on that subscribe button. You're supporting the show. It's only $5 a month, and you're going to get extra content from yours truly every Friday after the show where you can be interactive with me. So go ahead and click on that subscribe button. Boy, do we have a jam-packed show lined up for you today. There's so much to get to, including Attorney General Garland holding a press conference in Uvalde, Texas, a very comprehensive report on what police didn't do that could have saved so many lives. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. Coming up here in just a few, we're going to be speaking to this man. You know him as a former Bill Clinton advisor in the White House, a former CNN commentator, author, and it's a pleasure. We'll be having Keith Boykin join us here in just a few minutes. And then, it's going to be an all-out brawl on the air. I know it is. His name is David Pollack. He's the host of the David Pollack Show. He's also the director of the Veterans for Trump organization in Florida. I'm going to be asking him, why would any veteran vote for Donald Trump? We are going to get into it, and it's going to be a fiery conversation. That's coming up in hour number 2. I want to start off get right into it in Uvalde, Texas, right? So as I mentioned, Attorney General Garland held a press conference this morning, and for the most part, he really told us what we already knew. The cops in Uvalde that waited upwards of an hour and a half are true cowards. The fact that maybe these cops can never be officers again is not enough. These officers need to be tried, they need to be convicted, and many of them need to go to jail. Now, I understand these police officers are human beings. They didn't want to die. It is your job, and you take an oath to the Constitution. It is your job that when there is an active shooter situation, that you do everything in your power to end the threat. There are videos of officers looking on their cell phone. There were kids in that classroom, including the teacher, that were still breathing. They were still alive. They could have been saved. And Garland, for the most part, said, yeah, if officers did their job and they didn't wait upwards of an hour and a half, lives would have been saved. There has to now be criminal charges filed. There has to be. And I understand that there are a lot of Republicans out there that want to blame Democrats for all the crime in this country. Obviously, it's unwarranted. Are there some situations where Democrats are not doing a great job? Sure, nobody's perfect. But the bottom line is when you talk to Republicans about gun violence and gun control, they talk about hardening schools and arming kindergarten teachers. They don't talk about the real issues. And then they'll say, well, we need to do a better job with mental illness. Yet they keep voting against money that would fund those who are mentally ill. And all they care about, I shouldn't say all of them, a lot of these MAGA Republicans, all they care about is their A-plus rating from the NRA. An 18-year-old should not be allowed to walk into a gun store with no training and buy a bunch of AR-15s and thousands of rounds of ammunition. It can't happen in this country. And those officers that waited, and these Republicans, they say time and time again, if you bring up gun control, good guy with a gun beats a bad guy with a gun. Well, boy, that really didn't happen in Uvalde, Texas, did it? Didn't happen in Buffalo either, when that 18-year-old went into that market and a hero security guard, lost. I wish that wasn't the case. Good guys don't always win. Sometimes the good guys are actually cowards, and that's what took place in Uvalde, Texas. And then you have Ted Cruz, Cancun Cruz. Remember what he said the next day? We need to harden our schools. The back door should have been locked. Like that would have been a deterrent for an 18-year-old kid who just shot his grandmother in the face from going into a school and killing and massacring a bunch of innocent children. And on the day of that shooting in Uvalde, Texas, Governor Abbott, as I like to call him, Governor Abhole, was at a campaign rally counting his money, a campaign fundraiser. He didn't even cancel it, folks. He didn't call it off. They didn't even finish counting the dead bodies in that school, and Governor Abbott was still counting his money. It is a disgrace. Listen, at least Democrats come up with solutions when it comes to gun control. It doesn't mean we have to agree with all of it, but at least they try to come up with solutions. I've come up with my own. What solutions have Republicans come up with when it comes to gun control? I haven't heard anything reasonable from them other than More guns make us safer. If that was the case, we'd be one of the safest countries in the world when it comes to gun violence. It's the opposite. More guns do not make us safer. We know that for a fact. And don't talk to me about the Constitution. First of all, Democrats don't want to take all your guns away. That's a lie and a right-wing talking point. No Democrat elected official has ever said on the record that they want to take everybody's guns away. That's not true. What many Democrats want to do, and I tend to agree with them on this, is they want to take away the weapons of war. They want that type of bill put forth and passed like in the early 90s until Republicans allowed it to fizzle out. We need stronger red flag laws. We need an assault weapons ban. We need to raise the age from 18 to 21. We need mandatory training. If you just gave me 2 out of those 4, and Republicans would never do that, but if you gave me 2 out of those 4, lives would be saved in this country. Gun violence would start to plummet. Wouldn't end all the gun violence in this country. Just give me 2 out of 4. Republicans refuse to do that. Why? The overwhelming majority, not all, but the overwhelming majority of Republicans in this country care more about their A-plus rating from the NRA than they care about saving lives. The proof is in the pudding. When was the last time you heard a Democrat in a campaign ad or even in a campaign speech brag about their NRA rating? Almost never, right? In fact, they would rather brag about their F rating from the NRA. And those are probably the people that I would rather vote for. People that don't care about the NRA. They don't care about their rating from the NRA. They care more about public safety. Do many of these MAGA Republicans care about public safety? They'll talk to you about drag queen reading and how that's the biggest threat to kids until the cows come home. But do they actually really care about public safety? They care more about their A-plus rating from the NRA in the back pocket of Republicans. This is sad. And I feel every day for the families, really for the families of anyone who loses a loved one at the hands of gun violence. But can you imagine what these families of Uvalde, Texas have had to go through? Can you imagine the pain and the suffering and the slow walking when it comes to locals in Uvalde who have not really told the families the truth of what really happened and their incompetence? And it took Garland, who I do appreciate, took him a while in a thorough investigation to really come up with the facts here. Obviously, there's going to be a lawsuit. Money's not going to bring these kids back. These police officers need to go to jail. Okay, enough already. The police officers, most of them, who waited an hour and a half before entering that classroom, just short of an hour and a half, need to go to jail. And they need to pay for what they did. Listen, the main person responsible for this, of course, was the 18-year-old animal. Okay, that's the main person that's responsible for this. There's no question about that. We need to do something about gun control in this country, and Republicans are making it very difficult to make that happen. We need to do something. I've named you some of those things that we need to do. And it's getting to a point now where we're seeing these types of mass shootings happen almost on a regular daily basis. I'm sick of talking about it. But things are not going to change until you can convince some of these MAGA Republicans, which might be very difficult to do, but until you can convince them that more needs to be done, and when I say more, I don't mean, hardening our schools or arming our kindergarten teachers. But to talk about this subject and many more subjects today, we're joined by a guy who, of course, he's a film and TV producer. He's a former CNN commentator, used to be an advisor in the White House to Bill Clinton, somebody that I certainly have a lot of respect for. He's got a new book coming out. It's called Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race? 25 Arguments That Won't Go Away. It's coming out on the 23rd, and I can't wait to buy it myself. Of course, I'm talking about Keith Boykin, who joins us again on the show. Keith, it's great to have you back. I appreciate you. How are you doing?
I'm well, Brian. Good to see you again.
Yeah, appreciate the time, Keith. Before I get to some of the other issues facing this country, political news, I do want to talk to you a little bit about Uvalde, because if that's okay.
Okay.
So the Uvalde press conference happened earlier today, and Garland came out, holds his press conference, and I don't think there was anything surprising right there. Do you believe, though, that those officers, like I believe, should be convicted or at least charged with crimes?
Well, I don't really know the facts to be able to make an informed opinion about this, but
Mhm.
my inclination is that they failed to do their job.
Mhm.
And, I remember from law school, there's a concept called misprison, which means that for most people, if you see somebody in danger, you have no obligation to do anything to help them. It'd be great if you did.
Right.
But when you are entrusted with a certain position in society, you have a legal obligation to provide assistance.
Right.
And they failed to do so.
Mhm.
The question is, what level of accountability should follow? Should it just be, losing your job, or should there be some sort of criminal charges that come from that?
Yeah.
And you know, children died because of their failure. They definitely they don't deserve to continue to be in any sort of police force. But
Yeah.
I I I I think it's worth looking at whether they could be prosecuted and for what crimes.
Agree. And as do I, Keith. When we hear from so many MAGA Republicans today, Keith, we need to harden our schools. Let's arm our teachers. More guns are the answer. And my head explodes, Keith, because if more guns made us safer, then wouldn't we be one of the safest countries in the world when it comes to gun violence? To me, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. You're right, because we have more guns per capita than most industrialized societies, most Western nations for sure. And we also have more crime. We have more gun-related crime. We have more homicides because of gun violence. We have more mass shootings because of gun violence, because of the ubiquity of guns in our country. And it hasn't always been this way. This is a relatively recent phenomenon. This is what people forget. People think that America was always built in a society where everybody just carried guns. That's not true. Even
Right.
organizations like the NRA were in favor of gun control for decades. But a lot of this starts to change. This goes back to the reason why I called my book, Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race? A lot
Right.
of this goes back to the 1960s. Once Black people started to appear as a force in society, a political force, potentially even an armed force, then the idea of gun control became threatening to white
Right.
people, because we don't want to be unarmed when all these Black people, all these terrifying Black people are running around who might be doing things to us. So
Yeah.
you start to see a shift in the culture about guns because of
Mhm.
that time period.
Yeah. Why is it, Keith, that when I have these discussions with so many MAGA Republicans, and I do, they always want to talk about black on black crime. Look at all the crime in Chicago. And my response to them is always, I don't care what the color of somebody's skin is. Gun violence is gun violence. And it seems like in so many of these mass shootings, that's not the demographic, at least in the larger mass shootings. Why do you think Republicans always want to bring up black on black crime?
Well, a lot of reasons. One is it's a deflection. It's an excuse so they don't have to deal with the issue of what's at hand. The fact that we have more people dying of gun-related crimes in this country than practically any other country, per capita for sure. And the reason why is because we have so many guns. We have more guns than our people in this country, and that's an untenable situation for a civil society. And a lot of those guns are concentrated in the hands of very few people, to be honest, which is even more disturbing because people are just stockpiling tons and tons of guns. But the other reason is that it's easy for them to create these sort of racial mythologies instead of dealing with the facts, because they don't want to acknowledge the fact that most crime in this country is intraracial, not interracial. That means that the majority of white people who are killed by white people, and the majority
Yeah.
of Black people who are killed by Black people. That's
Right.
because we live in a racially segregated society. But nobody ever talks about white on white crime. When a white
Right.
person kills a white person, it's just crime. But
Yeah.
when a Black person does it, it becomes some sort of example of pathology, and that's
Mhm.
part of the problem.
Very good point. So what would you say to those that are black that are holding office, people like a Byron Donalds, the Byron Donalds of the world, who will talk about more about black on black crime. They won't talk about white on white crime. And they'll blame Democrats for all. If you talk to a guy like Byron Donalds, they'll blame Democrats for all the violent crime that's taking place in this country. What would you say to somebody like him?
Well, you can't take that seriously. Byron Donalds is a Trump supporting black Republican who's so in the pocket of Donald Trump that he's not willing to speak the truth, speak truth to power about issues of race. The one time he did something that was possibly speaking truth to power was when he criticized Ron DeSantis for his comments about slavery. But he was only doing that in service of Donald Trump, who also doesn't really care about protecting black people. So, there's always been a group of people, black people who are today Republicans. Back in the day, it used to be black Democrats before the party switched, who were willing to create, I think, false narratives in order to preserve white supremacy. And I think that's exactly what Byron Donalds is doing. I don't think he's doing his constituents any service by representing misinformation.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Speaking of race, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. So the New England Patriots, right? They just hired a new coach, Gerard Mayo, and Mayo holding a press conference, and people on the right are going, a lot of people on the far right are going crazy with a comment that I think is pretty fair that Mayo said, and I want to play that for you. Let's play that clip. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you don't see color, if you see color, then you can't see racism. I think that's a very fair statement to make. And then you have the Charlie Kirks of the world going on social media saying that, if he lets NFL players know, he's letting NFL players know that they should avoid playing for him if they're white. Actually, if you don't see color, you can't practice racism. Now, listen, obviously, Charlie Kirk is a moron, but there's so many people on the far right like Charlie Kirk that have a problem with Coach Mayo and the statement he made. I see nothing wrong with it at all. What do you say?
We all see color. Every person sees color. Even people who are technically colorblind still see color.
Right.
As long as you have eyes that can see, you're able to see color because we can see that there are differences among people in our society. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the differences have to have a significance. But the problem is that white society, white America created a country based on color for hundreds of years. That's the reason why slavery and segregation were able to exist, because they were able to distinguish who was black and who was white, and to create benefits for people who were white and to deprive those benefits for people who were black. And they did this for hundreds of years. And then suddenly, as soon as black people get a modicum of equality and freedom and are able to speak out about it, then they don't want us to talk about it. When people say they don't see color, they mean they don't want you to talk about the centuries of color privilege assigned to white people.
Bingo. I think you hit the nail right on the head there. If you're just joining up, he is Keith Boykin, film, TV producer, former CNN commentator. He's got a new book coming out. Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race? 25 Arguments That Won't Go Away. With that being said, you mentioned, the Civil War. Let's talk a little bit about Nikki Haley and her lack of, whether it be knowledge, some people might call her a racist. I don't know what's in her heart. But how can you talk about the Civil War and the so-called cause of it without bringing up the word slavery? And then her response the next day, Keith, was absurd, where she said it was some sort of Joe Biden Democrat operative, as if it was some sort of trick question when a third grader would be able to answer it. What did you make of that whole situation?
The problem is that Nikki Haley knows better. She was the governor of South Carolina. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union. South Carolina was the state that fired on Fort Sumter to start the Civil War. She was the governor when South Carolina took down the Confederate flag that was honoring the racist traitors who fought against the United States government. And so for Nikki Haley herself is an Indian American whose family has suffered racism in our country. And for her to say what she said about the Civil War and to pretend that this was some sort of difficult question, where she was worried, oh my God, this is such a hard question, she said, is a reflection not so much about just Nikki Haley's inability to be an honest broker of the truth. It's a reflection of just where the Republican Party is today. It's a reflection of the fact that they won't allow you to speak the truth.
And let's talk about that, Keith. Let's talk about, decency, if there is any within the people on the far right. I want to ask you about this. And this question doesn't have anything to do with race. It just, in my personal opinion, it's just decency. You have a former president. A jury has decided that he is a sexual abuser. The judge characterized it as rape. I would characterize it that way as well. I've called him a liable rapist. If Donald Trump wants to sue me for that, he can. And yet there are so many within the Republican Party today that don't care. They don't care about the 91 felony counts that he's facing. They don't care about the 25 women that have accused him of sexual assault or rape. They certainly don't care about the E. Jean Carroll case. What does that say about the Republican Party today if we're talking about decency, that not all, but so many Republicans are willing to just push things aside and say, oh, that's George Soros. That's the Democrats. He didn't do this.
Well, it was never about decency. Republicans spent a lot of time talking about being the party of family values, and they represented the moral majority, and they wanted to bring civility back to government and all this stuff. And they never believed in that stuff. They only believed in one thing. They believed in white supremacy and maintaining power and tax cuts for the rich. Of course, that's a given. But Donald Trump is the exemplar of that. There was a poll that was conducted. I talked about this in one of my recent books, a poll that was conducted when Obama was president of white evangelicals that indicated that the overwhelming majority of them opposed the idea of a president of someone being elected president who had moral failings. Then after Donald Trump was nominated, the same poll indicated that the majority of white evangelicals had no problem suddenly with a person who has moral failings being president of the United States. I mean, it was clearly, it's the way they used religion, for example, the way they use morality is so selectively geared toward penalizing one group of people. It's almost the same way they see crime, we're opposed to crime, but they've got the biggest criminal in the world running for president, and they're willing to support him with 91 charges and 4 indictments, not to mention, you said, 25 women who have already accused him of sexual assault. He's also got 6 bankruptcies. He's got 11 aides convicted. His university was shut down. His charity was shut down. His business has been found guilty of criminal conduct. What more do you need? No black person, no woman, no person of color with that type of criminal baggage and record could ever even conceive of being taken seriously as a candidate for president of the United States.
I agree with you 100%. That leads me to my next question. There are organizations out there, maybe not many, Blacks for Trump. You listen to the Larry Elders of the world. I've interviewed all these people. I think Candace Owens is an opportunist. Leo Terrell, another one. Larry Elder, who says systemic racism doesn't exist. I got into a heated debate with him. What do you make of these people and these organizations like Blacks for Trump? And there are people that will say, maybe not many, but they will say Trump was better for black people than any president in my lifetime. What do you say to that?
Well, I think I may have said this to you before, but there are black people who supported slavery too. There are black people who supported segregation. You can't win them all, but the overwhelming majority of black people do not support Donald Trump. Black women in particular, but black voters have been the most loyal constituency of the Democratic Party historically for the past many decades. And I don't see that changing anytime in the future because of Donald Trump. But the other side of it is that I've never, to be very honest, I've never been a Joe Biden fan. I voted for him in 2020. I'll vote for him again in 2024, but never been a big fan of him. But his record compared to Donald Trump is not even close. I mean, Joe Biden was the president who appointed. First of all, he worked for the first black president, Barack Obama. Second of all, he selected Kamala Harris to be his running mate, the first black woman to be a vice president. Thirdly, he selected Ketanji Brown Jackson to be a Supreme Court justice, the first black woman on the United States Supreme Court. Fourthly, he is the only person who was able to get Congress to finally pass the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act after decades and decades of failure and resistance and intransigence from both parties over the course of time. The president has also given historic funding to HBCUs, billions of dollars to HBCUs. He's fought to try to get voting rights restored. He hasn't been able to accomplish some of those things, and I have to I've been one of the critics of him on those issues. I've written about this in the Washington Post and other places. It didn't accomplish the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act or the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. But that was largely because Republicans were in opposition to that.
Exactly.
And even some of the other issues where he's tried to push for, like student loan debt relief, which disproportionately affects Black borrowers, there's Republicans who have been pushing against that. He tried to provide relief to Black farmers, aid to Black farmers after decades of discrimination they experienced, and Republicans went to court to try to block that. Mm-hmm. So, he's not a dictator. He's not a king. He can only do so much.
Right.
And like I said, I've never been a fan, but compared to Donald Trump, there's no contest.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So, Keith, obviously, you were an advisor to Bill Clinton. I wanted to ask you, I mean, back in the days when Bill Clinton was president, not a perfect man. He made his mistakes, but he left with a large surplus. He was able to work across the aisle. And while it wasn't easy, he was able to work with Republicans. Democrats and Republicans were able to work together at least a lot better back then than they're able to now. Now, I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But what advice would you give to Joe Biden? I mean, it's a very difficult and probably more difficult situation now, maybe perhaps than it was back then. But Clinton was able to do it back then. What advice would you give Joe Biden? How can Republicans and Democrats work together?
Are you serious? I don't think it's possible. I mean, Republicans can't even work with other Republicans. I mean, they just ousted their own speaker, Kevin McCarthy, a couple of months ago, and now they're pissed at Mike Johnson because he's brokered a deal to keep the government running. How dare he do that? I mean, I don't know how anybody could possibly continue to support the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is not a governing party. They've become a grievance party.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I tend to agree with you on that. I think Joe Biden's in a very difficult spot. What changed? Was it just the MAGA Donald Trump era? What made it so difficult for Democrats to work with Republicans? I mean, it's never been easy, right? But I think it's fair to say it probably was easier back in the days when you were an advisor for Bill Clinton. What changed? Is it just the Trump MAGA far right people, the evangelical right? What is it?
I don't think it's Trump, actually. I think it predates Trump, because I'm old enough. I'm 58. I remember the 80s when Ronald Reagan, who's a Republican, and Tip O'Neill, who's a liberal Democrat from Massachusetts, could work together and come up with a compromise and get things done. That doesn't happen anymore. Republicans like to point to Robert Bork. They feel like everything went south after Robert Bork.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's not just about Bork. It's about race again. What happened is that Republicans realized that they were more invested in being like I said, this grievance party than being a governing party, starting in the 1990s with the rise of Newt Gingrich from Georgia, who ran for Congress, ran as House Speaker with this campaign as a contract with America. Which was basically designed to dismantle government. And they've been trying to do this for decades since that time. And they have no interest in working to make government make government function effectively, because if they do, it vitiates their whole argument about the reason why we don't need government. They want government to fail so they can show that we don't need government.
Yeah. I mean, Donald Trump said it himself. He wants the economy to fail before he's hoping he gets back into office. That's not really making America great again. He only thinks about himself. I wanted to ask you this, and I mentioned Larry Elder earlier. What would you say to somebody like a Larry Elder who constantly has said for decades that systemic racism doesn't exist? Now, I don't even know if he truly believes that. I think the base of people that listen to his show, which are usually white, middle-aged Republicans, like to hear that. But what would you say to somebody like Larry Elder who says systemic racism is non-existent?
Well, I wonder if you go as far as Nikki Haley did in saying that America has never been a racist country, because I think that takes a lot of cojones to be able to go back in time to the beginning of the founding of the republic when we had slavery, and 41 of the 56 people who signed the Declaration of Independence were enslavers, to argue that we've never been a racist country. But I would tell people like that, just look at the facts. I mean, the country in the Constitution that was adopted in 1788 says clearly that Black people were treated as 3/5 of a citizen. How can you say that's not systemic racism when the Constitution tells you that you are a second class citizen? In 1857, the United States Supreme Court decided that black people were not citizens of the United States in the Dred Scott case. In the Plessy v. Ferguson case in the 1890s, the Supreme Court said that separate but equal is constitutional. And then you have decades and decades of Jim Crow and lynchings and torture and terrorism directed at black people,
Right.
state sanctioned terrorism directed at black people. We have a passage of a few laws in the 1960s, 64, 65, and 68, that tried to make things a little bit better, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act. And then suddenly you think that all those races just disappear, and all the
Yeah.
structures that benefited white privilege and white supremacy just evaporated overnight. It's implausible. It's
Yeah.
not true. And all the evidence, even today, seems to support that. The
Sure.
criminal justice disparities,
Yeah.
disparities in healthcare, the unemployment disparities. The black unemployment rate has never been anywhere near as low as the white unemployment rate. But for most of the history that they've been
Right.
recording it, it's actually been double the white unemployment rate.
And
It's
I
not
brought that
because
up. Yep.
it's not because black people are lazy and can't work. It's because we have structural racism that makes it harder for black people to get a job.
Yep.
I just today saw a story I reported on Twitter, on X, whatever
Mhm.
Elon Musk is calling his whatever that is. I just reported today a story, a new research that came out that showed that black children, children of color in general, are less likely to receive painkillers in the hospital when they get a broken arm or broken leg than white children.
Gosh, that is awful. I didn't know that. I'm going to have to read that. That's absolutely embarrassing. Like when I see somebody who is white, like I am, but somebody who is a racist. Yes, I do believe Donald Trump is a racist. And I said he's an embarrassment to white people and he's an embarrassment to the country because, as you know, not everybody thinks like Donald Trump. When you look at like a Larry Elder or a Candace Owens or a Byron Donalds, do you say to yourself, Keith, wow, what an embarrassment to people who look like me? Do you say, well, an embarrassment to the country? How do you react to that?
Well, I mean, there's an old line, all skin folks ain't kin folks, that black people use. And I understand that. I don't think Larry Elder or Candace Owens or Byron Donalds or Clarence Thomas even are embarrassments to black people, because I don't think that we can group all people into a category like that, in the sense that we don't all have to think alike and do the same thing. I certainly don't approve of what they're doing, and I feel that what they're doing is detrimental to black people.
Right.
But I feel like once we start expecting people to behave a certain way or act a certain way, then we're also feeding into racial stereotypes. It's like if someone can be an embarrassment to your race, and you can also be a credit to your race. That old phrase that people use, like, you're a credit to your race, like that's supposed to be a compliment. But it's based on this assumption that we have to look at every black person as a representative of all other black people, and that's problematic too. If I rob a bank, I'm the one who should be held responsible. But if my picture shows up on the news, people start to say, well, black people are bank robbers, But if a white person robs a bank, okay, a white person robbed a bank. Nobody says white people are bank robbers. And that's part of the problem. We have to sort of start to see people as individuals, at the same time acknowledging that color and race are real, but not to treat them differently because of that.
Sure. And I think you might agree with me. If you put on Fox News or some of these right-wing stations, they always seem to be showing black people committing crimes. Do you notice that? Why is that? It just seems to me it could be somebody knocking somebody out on the street in public or a robbery. They always want to show these clips of African Americans that are committing crimes. I find that very troubling, as I'm sure you would as well.
Well, it fits into their grievance politics. The reason why Fox News does this is because that's what their predominantly white audience wants to see. And it also fits into the mentality of white victimhood. In order for racism to exist, white Americans who hold racist ideas have to see themselves as being the ones who are aggrieved. They don't want to see themselves as the perpetrators of something that they think of as being bad. So they have to think, well, we have to do this because those black people are dangerous. That's the reason why we have to protect ourselves and buy all these guns and lock them up in jail. Or we have to do this because those black people are lazy. That's the reason we can't give them jobs or treat them equally or give them a raise or a promotion. We have to not give black kids painkillers or aspirin in the hospital or ibuprofen because, oh my God, they have a higher pain tolerance than white kids do. So we have to start to believe these racist ideas in our heads in order to justify our racist beliefs and the privilege that we receive because of that racist society.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very well said. Keith, before I let you go, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your new book, which I believe is out next week, right? January 23rd is when it's out on the shelves. Tell me a little bit about this book and why you decided to write it.
It is. It comes out next Tuesday. Why does everything have to be about race? And January 23rd is the release date. It's a book that debunks 25 questions about race, 25 arguments about race. Everything from I don't see color to I don't have a racist bone in my body, or Barack Obama. We gave you Barack Obama. What else do you need? Or Civil War was not about slavery. It was about states' rights. We've all heard these arguments over and over again. The sad thing is, when I wrote the book over the past few years, I wasn't expecting that it would come out in a time when people are still making these arguments, Brian. I wasn't expecting to see Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis and other people on national television running for president arguing that America is not a racist country and slavery was not about Civil War was not about slavery and all these other things. I'm like, wow, we haven't progressed at all. And so that's the reason why I wrote this book, because I think a lot of us are tired of the gaslighting.
Can I ask you about that though, Keith? Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
When Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley make statements like that, do you think they actually believe it, or are they just saying that to appeal to the MAGA base?
I definitely don't think that Nikki Haley believes it, but I don't feel like she really knows what she believes. I feel like she says whatever she needs to say based on the circumstances, which is the reason why she condemned Trump when he ran for office and worked for Trump, and then condemned him again when she left office, and then ran against him but never criticized him until it became convenient for her to criticize him. She's an opportunist. Ron DeSantis, I don't know enough about him in terms of what his core beliefs are, other than his own opportunism, but he's an educated guy. There's no reason why he would think that, except for the fact that he too believes that that's what you have to say in order to prevail in the Republican Party these days. That's the real danger, that the Trump MAGA Republican Party is a party of not just of racism, but of racial denialism, of denial of the past of American history.
No question, and certainly denialism of many of things that are in our Constitution, including our democracy, which I believe is at stake. And I know you would agree with me on that, Keith. It is always a pleasure having you on the show. I can't wait to pick up your book next week, and I highly recommend everybody pick it up because you're a great author. Love your commentary, my friend, and look forward to having you on again down the road. Keith Boykin, I appreciate your time so much. Thank you, sir. Thank
you, Brian.
Appreciate that. That's Keith Boykin, everybody. Does a great job. I by the way, I wish he was still on CNN doing stuff for CNN, because he's great. He's great because his arguments are based on fact, not fiction. Fact about the history of racism in this country. Fact. The history. Okay? Whether we're talking about critical race theory, which I think Republicans, make out to be this big issue, which it's not being taught in our schools. But he's absolutely right. To answer my own question, I believe Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis absolutely know that, what slavery was all about. They know why the Civil War started. They understand it. The reason why they answer these questions the way they do is because it appeals to the Republican extreme MAGA base. My thanks to Keith Boykin for joining us. Here's what we're going to do. And by the way, if you're just joining us, we just had Keith Boykin on. We have a treat for you coming up in hour number 2 here. I will take a few phone calls. We're going to take a break. A guy by the name of David Pollack is going to be joining us from the David Pollack Show, a staunch Trump supporter, conservative. He's the director of Veterans for Trump. Oh, so this is going to get really good, folks, in hour number 2. I will open up the phone lines now, though. Your thoughts on that interview I just did with Keith Boykin, your thoughts on race, your thoughts on Uvalde and gun control, and why Republicans seem to do nothing, or they come up with ridiculous solutions. More guns are the answer. Let's arm our teachers. Your thoughts on that as well. I will open up the phone lines now. 702-221-7283. 702-221-SAVE. Again, that number one more time, 702-221-7283. We will take more phone calls in 90 seconds. We will take a quick break. Be back right after this. You're listening to Pushing the Limits right here on KSHP. I guess you could say controversial guest. I don't know, depending on how you look at things, but certainly somebody that I disagree with on a number of issues. His name is David Pollack from The David Pollack Show. Staunch conservative, big Trump supporter, and he's also the director of Veterans for Trump. So my question for him was the same question I posted on Occupy last night, which is, if you're a veteran, how on earth can you support Donald Trump after all the despicable things he said about our brave men and women in uniform? So I'll be asking David that question coming up here in just a little bit. Have you been following the court proceedings that have been taking place? Donald Trump in the courtroom in the E. Jean Carroll case. And it's interesting because his attorney, Ms. Haba, has really made herself look like a fool. This was a recent statement that she made on a podcast, and I actually think it rings true. Have a listen to this.
So I'll tell you something. Somebody said to me, Alina, would you rather be smart or pretty? And I said, oh, easy, pretty. I can fake being smart.
You're not faking it very well, though, Haba, that's for sure. So what's taken place just in the last couple days to prove that Haba is a terrible attorney and she has absolutely no idea what she's talking about? Well, first of all, let's just point blank just say it. She doesn't know how to impeach a witness with a deposition transcript. The judge had to send the jury out to explain it to her. Do you know how embarrassing that is? This just happened in the last couple of days. Yesterday, she doesn't know or understand the hearsay rule. A really good quote from Judge Kaplan. No, we are not going to read out loud a document not yet in evidence. We are going to take a break here, and you're going to refresh your memory on how to get a document into evidence. This is basic attorney 101 stuff. Ron Filipowski, by the way, is a great follow on Twitter. He said a trials lawyer's job is to persuade the jury. He's right. He said Alina Haba views her job as impressing Trump. She does. The things you are required to do in a courtroom to impress Trump alienates and pisses off judges and juries. But then they will go on social media and TV and complain how unfair it all was. Filipowski is 150% correct. There's nothing like telling a federal judge that you have to travel for your mother-in-law's funeral and you need to postpone things, and then all of a sudden he's holding a campaign event in New Hampshire literally less than 24 hours later because Donald Trump is full of crap, and we all know that. I think Mitt Romney said it best the other day. He said, you had a jury that said that Donald Trump had raped a woman, and yet I don't think that seems to be moving the needle. There are a lot of things about today's electorate I don't understand. Mitt, I am in agreement with you 150%. Oh, but Brian, it wasn't rape. He was found liable for sexual abuse. If you read in the evidence of what the jury heard of what Donald Trump did to this woman, it's rape. You are supporting a rapist. I'm sorry, folks, if you don't like that type of language. That's exactly what you are supporting. And Attorney Haba is a complete moron. She has no idea what she's doing. I mean, what was that movie with Joe Pesci where he played an attorney? I'm trying to think. My cousin Vinny. Thank you, Numchuck. And I would rather have Joe Pesci as my attorney. At least he did a good job at the end of that movie, and he comes from a good place. All Haba is trying to do is trying to impress Donald Trump. That's all she's doing, and they're looking at this thing as raising campaign funds and Donald Trump being the victim, which he's not. The real victim in this case is E. Jean Carroll, and the jury decided on that, and Donald Trump is going to have to pay for it. All right, let's take some phone calls. 702-221-7283. And again, that number, 702-221-7283. By the way, the director of the Veterans for Trump organization out of Florida, David Pollack, is going to be joining us here in hour number 2. Oh, that's going to be interesting. Maybe not as interesting as this next phone call. I don't know. 702-221-7283 is the number to call. Let's start off with the resident MAGA supporter, Julie. Hello, Julie.
Hi, Brian. How you doing?
Good, Julie. What's on your mind?
Do you have any questions for me? Because every time that I ask you a question, you don't allow me. So would you like me to express on veterans, on Carol, on racism? What do you want me to tell you? What is the topic that you prefer?
Well, I mean, you called into this show, so I would just like you to be on topic to what I am talking about.
Okay. Regarding racism, I don't think that systemic racism exists in this country unless because who voted for Obama twice since
okay, so let me respond to that.
Let me finish.
You don't think
and then you answer me.
You don't think
Black
systemic
population
racism
in the United States is 13% of the U.S. population. 13.
So
the
what?
Rest is Hispanic, is white people.
So what?
Mostly white.
So what?
Who voted for Obama?
So you're
White.
making the claim that because we had our first black president years back, systemic racism doesn't exist. You're saying that because we had one black president. But now I'm going to ask you a question, since you don't think systemic racism exists. And I'm going to give you a perfect example of why I believe it does. His name is Ahmaud Arbery. Julia, are you familiar with the Ahmaud Arbery case? Because if not, I'll explain it to you.
One individual case. Are you talking about one individual case?
I'm not talking about one individual person. I'm talking about a system, and I will explain it to you now. Ahmaud Arbery. No. I'm going to explain it to you, and then you're going to respond. We're not talking about one person. We're talking about a system. I will explain. Ahmaud Arbery was an innocent black man jogging down the street. He did absolutely nothing wrong. 3 white Klansmen are now murderers, and they're behind bars. But it doesn't end there, because 12 officers that day saw the video of the lynching. And not only did they not make an arrest, but they lied to Ahmaud Arbery's mother. The chief of police saw it. Politicians saw it. They hid that underneath the rug. You see, Julie, it wasn't one person. Ahmaud Arbery was murdered and lynched, but it was a system that failed Ahmaud Arbery, because dozens and dozens and dozens of people in that county that are blatant racists, that have no business having powerful positions, tried to hide it under the rug. And the only reason why those 3 people, murderers, are now behind bars is because one of them released the lynching to a news station several months later. That's not one person. That is a system, from the police chief, from the police precinct to all the police officers to all the investigators and even politicians locally there. Do you not understand that that is a system that failed Ahmaud Arbery? And if Ahmaud Arbery was white, that would have never happened. If Ahmaud Arbery was white and 3 black people in that city did that to a white Ahmaud Arbery, those 3 black people would have been in jail within seconds. Do you not understand that?
Screaming at me, as always.
You know what?
Screaming at
I'm
me,
making
as
my
always.
point with passion. If you don't like it, then you can hang up the
Okay.
phone.
No, yes, you are correct. There is racism in this country.
I
When
didn't.
came
No,
from Cuba-
no,
Let
no,
me
no,
speak.
no.
Let me
Potter
speak.
down. No, that's not the point that I am making. Anybody with an IQ over 5 knows that there's racism. The question was systemic racism. And you said systemic racism didn't exist. And I just gave you a perfect example of why it does. The system failed Ahmaud Arbery and his family. That's not just racism. That's systemic racism. Why do you not understand that?
Let me speak on based on my personal experience. When I came from Cuba, I worked for the Postal Service, and the black people was very rude to me, and they treat me bad. Black people.
So
I
black people
suffered
at a post
racism
office treated you bad. So that's your
really
anecdotal
bad,
evidence
because
that's
because
your
I am a
anecdote.
Hispanic
I just
person.
gave you
So
an
don't-
example.
that's my experience.
Oh my God. I just gave you an example, Julie, of an innocent black man that was lynched. And after he was shot and killed, one of the individuals there was calling him the N-word when he was taking his last breaths. And you're trying to compare that to you working at a post office and anecdotal evidence that some black people might have said some things that you were offended by? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me, Julie?
Yes, because I worked for the Postal Service when I came from Cuba, and they didn't want to
Guess
hire
what?
any
I've had a
Hispanics
lot of
or
white people. I've had
So
a lot of.
racism is not exclusive to
I
one
said
race.
systemic.
Black people are racist.
Oh my
too.
God. Potter
So
down
don't
again.
give me-
Potter down again. Julie, I never said that white people and black people can't be racist. You're losing your focus again, Julie. We are talking about, please listen, Julie, if you're capable. We're talking about systemic racism. You made the claim that you don't believe systemic racism exists. And now your argument is some black people might have been rude to you when you were at the post office. So what? So what? People can be rude. I have a lot of white people that are rude to me. Who cares? We are talking about a system, Julie. Do you understand that? The system failed Ahmaud Arbery. It wasn't just because some people in that town might be racist. It's the system, the law enforcement, the investigators, the police officers, the politicians. Do you not understand that? They all had the video. They all saw the video of the murder, and they hid it under the rug, and even worse, they lied to Ahmaud Arbery's mother. And that's a little bit more serious than somebody not being nice to you at a post office.
Yes. Do you want to know more? I was pregnant, and a black supervisor denied me life duty. The system failed me. So there is racism in every race. Black could be racist too.
So, Julie, do you think it's easier to be black or white? Hey, Julie, I'm sorry that happened to you. Do you think it's easier to be black or white in this country? Who do you think gets treated better in this country?
It doesn't matter.
No, it does matter. It doesn't matter to you because you're a moron. So I'll ask it again. Answer the question. And if you're not going to answer, I'm going to move on to the next call. Who do you think gets treated more fairly in this country? And who do you think in the history of the United States has been treated fairly more? Minorities, in this particular instance, black people or white people? Answer the question and stop talking and listen to my question. Who do you think gets treated more fairly in this country? Black people or white people?
Black people have more privilege than white people.
All right. Have a nice day, Julie. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You think black people have a benefit and privilege over white people in this country, in the history of this country? It's the dumbest answer I've ever heard in my life, but I wouldn't expect anything different from you. 702-221-7283. Folks, I'm talking about a black innocent man who was lynched, and the entire system failed Ahmaud Arbery. And Julie's response to that is, I had some black people that were rude to me at the post office. Folks, I don't know how to handle a call like that. I just don't. 702-221-7283 is the number to call. 702-221-7283. Let's go to Obi. Obi is next up on Pushing the Limits. Hi, Obi.
Oh boy, Julie's gonna think that I'm stalking her, but with my calling right after her. Listen, first of all, the name of the movie was My Cousin Vinny.
Thank you.
Now, talking about racism, you gotta remind Julie that in her Florida, her own backyard, in 1920, in a place called Ocoee, I think, there was a massacre of black people because they intended to vote. And 2 or 3 years after that, I don't quite remember the date, came Rosewood. So remind her where black people were massacred again.
Mm-hmm.
And for your next guest that I don't think I'm going to be able to see because I have something to do, you ask him how it's possible that he's supporting Donald Trump.
I will
when
ask
Donald Trump put a doctor to say that he got bone spur so he wouldn't go to the army.
Oh yeah, I'm going to ask him about that. I'm going to ask him about Trump dodging the military. I'm going to ask him about the comments Donald Trump has made about our bravest service members like John McCain. I don't respect him because he was captured. Oh, mark my words, Obi, you have my word. I'm going to ask him those questions. And David Pollack is the director of Veterans for Trump, and he's going to be joining us here in about 15 minutes. You're damn right. I'm going to ask him those questions. You have my word, Obi, okay?
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Obi. Appreciate the call. Number to call if you want to be a part of the conversation, 702-221-7283. And again, that number, 702-221-SAVE. Let's go to Susan, who's next up on Pushing the Limits. Hi, Susan.
Hi.
What's on your mind?
I just had to, I wanted to talk about systemic racism.
Sure.
I am a white female, and I am fully aware of my privilege. And it's not that I'm colorblind; it's that I'm empathetic. I can try to understand what Black people and Hispanic people and other people like that have been through. In fact, my mother was racially profiled and treated badly because she was Italian.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But
Susan, when I'm talking to this woman, Julie, and I'm trying to explain to her the Ahmaud Arbery case, which, by the way, I followed very closely, the trial and everything. Innocent black man, not a violent criminal. He wasn't doing anything wrong that day. And when I talk about how this young man was lynched, right? He was lynched. I think we all could agree on that. And he was called the N-word. Witness testimony, he was called the N-word when he was taking his last breaths. And Julie's response to that is, oh, well, I had some black people say some not so nice things to me when I worked at the post office. I mean, are people that complicit? Like, I don't even, how do you talk to somebody like that?
Yeah. Well, I've had a lot of people say bad things to me, and they were all white. So
yeah, I mean, listen, there are all sorts of different people that are bad people, and they look all different. But that doesn't mean what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about systemic racism. And when I ask somebody, you think it's easier to be white or black in this country? And Julie's response is, MAGA supporter, by the way, her response is, oh, well, black people have privilege over white people. It's just like, how could I even take somebody like that serious? I mean, you can't, right? I mean, you can't.
You can't.
They have the blinders on. You can't.
Yeah.
It's just it's frustrating, right? And I'm not saying I'm not going to sit here and say every black person is a victim, and I don't have white guilt, but at the same time, I have an understanding of the history of this country, unlike Nikki Haley. I have an understanding of the Civil War. I have an understanding about how minorities have been treated in this country, unlike somebody that looks like myself. There is something called white privilege, and if people don't believe me like Julie, then just today, look at the average pay white compared to black people. I mean, what's the explanation there? Are black people just not as capable? Of course not. Why are there so few black people that are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies? Why are there so few black people that own sports franchises? I mean, listen, it's something that if we can't at least admit to that, then there's not going to be change, right?
Right.
Yeah, and
we have to look at the past to not repeat it.
Absolutely.
And these MAGA people are denying the past.
They are.
So they will repeat it.
They are. Critical race theory. They're banning books. It's just it's a never-ending saga over and over and over again. And there are a percentage of people in this country. I don't think it's a large percentage, but there are a percentage of people in this country that are white. I would imagine many of them are MAGA Republicans. Notice I'm not saying Republicans, MAGA Republicans, that not only do they believe systemic racism doesn't exist, but they think like Julie. They actually think that black people have privilege over white people, which is obviously an idiotic statement. And I think you have to be a very dumb person to think that way. You have to a lot of ignorance, and that's really what racism is, right? It's ignorance. There are a lot of ignorant people out there, and unfortunately, they're out there. But I'm glad you and I are not two of them, Susan. And I do appreciate your phone call. You have a great rest of your Thursday. Okay, thank you for calling in.
You too.
Appreciate you. Thank you. 702-221-7283 is the number to call. Again, 702-221-SAVE. Let's go to Lori. Lori is next up on Pushing the Limits. Hi, Lori.
Hi, Brian. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
I have two subjects. One on this racism. I had a friend, a white lady and I'm white myself, that grew up poor in coal country in Pennsylvania. So she didn't believe there was anything that is white privilege. And I tried to explain to her that, just because you weren't wealthy doesn't mean you weren't privileged.
Right.
Your skin color definitely in this country dictates, unfortunately, privilege. And I just heard Nikki Haley say in the same sentence, racism doesn't exist in America, but I've experienced it in my life.
She said it's not really a racist country. And while I don't believe that the majority of people in this country are racist, when you look at the Civil War, when you look at slavery, how can you make the statement that she makes? She's so complicit, and I think she ruined her entire political career, starting with her lack of an answer when it came to the Civil War, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Well, I don't think Republicans MAGA Republicans.
Yeah.
Now, those rhinos, they are okay with me. And
most of them are with me. Most of them are with me. Chris Christie, the Liz Cheneys, the Mitt Romneys, the Adam Kinzingers. At least they're on the right side of history.
Ones that have a little bit of a backbone.
Yeah, exactly.
They definitely do.
Yeah.
But those that are kissing the ring, they're killing our country.
They really are.
And they are, and it's we usually age our presidents when they're in term.
Yeah.
Trump aged us.
Yeah.
He didn't look any different than the day he came into the office, like every other president I've ever known.
I'll tell you.
Obama,
I'll tell you.
But he aged us.
Oh, no question. I have never been a racist person. I don't look at color, but I do look at orange men named Donald Trump, and I don't like them very much. So I don't know if that.
And I've never hated anybody until Orange Man. My other topic is my husband lost his legs in Vietnam.
Oh,
and I just do not understand the concept of veterans.
Well, you know what? First of all, God bless your husband and his service to this great nation and risking everything. He's a hero. And you're going to want to stick.
He volunteered at 17. He turned 18 in boot camp and 19 in Philadelphia Naval Hospital.
People like your husband are the reason why I'm able to go on the radio every day and enjoy doing what I do.
He's also buried in I lost him in 2010, and he's in Arlington National Forest. Cemetery. And if they ever try to plant Trump there, I will blow up his headstone.
I hear you. I understand your frustration, and God bless you and your late husband for being a hero. I appreciate the call, Lori. Thank you so much. 702-221. Thank you. 702-221-7283 is the number to call. Let's go to Dan. Dan is next up on Pushing the Limits. Dan, what's going on? Hi, Dan. Can you hear me?
Hey.
What's up, Dan?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. How you doing?
Doing good, Dan. What's on your mind?
Well, a few things, and I'm just going to state this, and of course, you may not agree with it, but to me, there is no such thing as a good Republican. I really don't care how nice they may be or how sane they may seem, just by affiliation.
Well,
They're bad.
here's my response to that. Yes, I do disagree. I understand what you're saying, but I do disagree with you to an extent. I know some good Republicans. I know Republicans that are good family people. They're good husbands. They're good wives. They're good parents. They're good sons. They're good daughters. I disagree with them on policy. The good Republicans out there, in my opinion, are the ones that are at least able to admit that Donald Trump is a threat to our democracy and he's a despicable human being. Doesn't mean I have to always agree with them on policy. But I do believe there are some good Republicans out there, some decent human beings out there. I'll give you an example. Liz Cheney. I disagree with her 99% of the time when it comes to policy. But at least she put the country first before her own political career, and I will always have respect for her for that.
I do understand that.
Yeah.
But, if they are good people and they understand democracy, why would they even want to be a Republican? And that's why I say there's no such thing as a good Republican.
I mean, I think there are a lot of Reagan Republicans still out there, Dan. I think.
Well, Reagan was I won't say the word I want to say, but he was a moron. He was a total idiot. He was an American.
But when I use the term Reagan Republican, it's anti-MAGA. It's, they stand by their principles, even though we might disagree with some of those principles. So while I understand your frustration with Republicans, I feel your frustration. I don't agree with a lot of Republicans in office today either. I'm with you, and I'm a registered independent. But at the same time, the Chris Christies of the world, it took him a little bit of time, but at least he's on the right side of history now. Joe Walsh did the show yesterday. He was a Trump enabler back in 2016. He admits he made a mistake. So we have to look at those people and say, hey, you know what? I'm glad you're on the right side of history now. I understand that, you made a mistake, but I'm glad you're on the right side of history. And, if you just, and this is just my opinion, okay? If you just hate every Republican out there and you say no Republicans are good, the problem with that is we're never going to get anything done in Washington. You have to be able to work with some of the reasonable Republicans, right?
Well, yeah, and I get what you're saying, but my point is, these are like the old Republicans who, where it was a decent party at one time.
Right.
Why would they want to affiliate or associate themselves with this insane party?
I believe because a lot of them are conspiracy theorists and a lot of them are maybe closet racists. I mean, I don't know, but I got to let you go.
No, I'm asking why did these good Republicans, supposedly good Republicans, remain Republican? They're just by association.
But I would say a lot of those good Republicans, and I appreciate the call. I got to move on, but I think there's a good portion of those Republicans who are still Republicans by their principle, but they don't support Donald Trump. Let's take a few more quick calls. Let's go to Alan. Alan, you're next on Pushing the Limits. What's up, Alan?
Hey, Brian, love your show, buddy. Hey,
Thank you.
I want to go back a couple of weeks ago to one of the trials. I believe it was the January 6th, the insurrection trial. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Trump's attorney saying that the president should be immune, basically should be immune from everything?
Yes, I did play some of that audio a few weeks ago, which was absolutely and positively ridiculous. I don't think any reasonable person would be okay with that.
So my question would have been this very simple. So what you're saying is Donald Trump, if he was president, he basically could find a bunch of guys from the SEAL team and go out there and assassinate his opponents and stuff, right?
Right. Of course, that was the legal argument that one of his attorneys was making again, which is completely asinine and ridiculous. But there are some MAGA Republicans out there that believe it.
Brian, hold on there, buddy.
Yep.
So let me ask you something.
Sure, quickly. Go ahead.
What's wrong with that idea? And I'll tell you why I say that. So if you're telling me the president's above the law, he can go kill somebody and do whatever he wants to do.
I'm not saying that.
What would you be telling Joe Biden right now if that was a fact?
Can you imagine? Well, I'll answer it this way, and thank you for the call, by the way. If Joe Biden today threatened to kill somebody that he was, I don't know, it could be Donald Trump, could be anybody. Imagine what Republicans would say. Oh, put him in jail. That's a threat. That's this, that's that. So Joe Biden would never do that. But just the idea that somehow Donald Trump could be immune to breaking the law, doing that to me is absurd. Let's try to steal one more call here, and then we got to get to our guest. Let's go to Curtis. Curtis, what's going on, man?
Yeah, how you doing there?
Good.
I'm Curtis. I'm out of California. I just want to say, back in the, I the day is my 75th birthday,
Yep.
by the way. But I integrated the schools
Happy
in
birthday.
St. Louis, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
Integrated the schools in St. Missouri and in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a veteran. I was stationed at Nellis Air Force
Thank you for your
Base
service.
back during the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
I have 3 doctorate degrees now, raised in Watts, California. But I can remember that once when I was about 9 years old, I was listening to a TV program, and these 2 white men were on there talking about sports. And they were explaining that black people didn't have the mentality to be quarterbacks and have positions that are thinking positions. They need to have just the brutal positions.
Yeah.
I can remember at 8 years old asking God, why did you make us where we can't play basketball?
I want to ask
Why
you.
did you make us where we can't play football?
Right. No, I hear you. And by the way, thank you for your service to this country. Before I introduce my next guest, you're the perfect person to ask this. What would you say to veterans out there that support Donald Trump?
Well, after he said that those people in the graves are suckers and losers,
Yeah.
I think that the person that still support that have to question his own moral values.
I don't
as
disagree.
an American.
I don't disagree with you.
it-
Let me say again, I'm glad there's people like you out there that you risked it all for this country, so idiots like me, could be on the radio every day. In all seriousness, thank you for your service. You're a hero. I got to move on, and I appreciate your call. You
Thank
call
you.
back anytime. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your service to this country. All right. Without further ado, the guy joining us on the line right now, speaking of this, what a perfect segue. He is the director of Veterans for Trump organization based out of Florida. He is also the host of the David Pollack Show. He is a staunch Donald Trump supporter. I have many Trump supporters on this show, and we always have good conversations, and I appreciate David Pollack joining us right now. David, I appreciate you being here, my friend. How are you?
Good, Brian. Thanks for having me. Great show, man. I've been listening while I was backstage, and he's got a great show. I mean, obviously your guests probably think I'm a bad Republican, but but it's a really good show, man. You're doing a great job.
David, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you coming on. And even though we might disagree on some stuff, I think it's always great to have conversations like this with people like you. Let me start by asking you this. I guess this is the obvious question. You're the director of the Veterans for Trump.
Yeah.
And I ask this question to veterans a lot. The comments just that Donald Trump made about John McCain, not respecting John McCain because he was captured. What were your thoughts on that when he made those statements?
Yeah, a lot of things that Donald Trump says sometimes makes me raise my eyebrows. And that's why this is going to be a hard conversation for you, because although I do support Donald Trump wholeheartedly, I don't think I fall into some of these camps of the way people think I'm going to think on some issues.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean, yeah, clearly he says things that make you raise eyebrows. What I learned early on about Donald Trump was that he has the ability to get news and make news and get press and make enemies and become villains and heroes. And he's a showman. And we live in a really weird time where all of this is kind of a show. I mean, depending on what your favorite news network is, whatever your favorite talent is, and whatever you're watching, a lot of this is entertainment versus substance. And so what I've learned was Donald Trump is a master of entertainment. He's an entertainer first.
Can I ask you something on that then?
Of course you can.
Then
Yeah.
why would you support an entertainer rather than somebody that takes number one as substance? Why would you support an entertainer as the leader of the free world?
Because he uses his ability to entertain to actually be effective. And that's the interesting part of what he's done so well. People have tried to emulate this, by the way, on the left and right, everywhere, how he's able to do both. And people have tried to emulate Trump unsuccessfully. I think superficially, a lot of people think Trump is really just a bully who says a lot of mean things and is offensive and says mean tweets and, he's a bad guy. What people can't see past is, and I'm not saying that's my approach, but in the environment we're in right now, politically, unfortunately, that is an effective approach.
Let me ask you that then.
Yeah.
If he was effective, why is it everybody around him seems to either go to jail? Why are so many of his companies filing for bankruptcy? Why is he facing 91 felony counts? Why is he a liable sexual abuser? If he's so effective, why did he lose the 2020 election?
That's a lot of different issues. Which one do you want to take first?
Any of them. I think it all proves to you that he's not effective. He also ran in 2016 claiming that he was going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it and he's going to convict Hillary Clinton. He didn't do any of those two things. I mean, so take it from there. Take anyone.
I got to remember. I should have taken notes. The thing is, so look, let's start with the wall. Sure. I'll go and work my way backwards. Sure. And I'll point out the fact, yes, he did have people chanting "lock her up," but then when he was in the power to do it, he didn't. That's an important distinction. And versus where we're at right now, you mentioned the 96 indictments. That is the opposite. I mean, now I think whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you try and look, I don't want to get too far down this because there's so many things I want to mention. With the 96 indictments, however many it is at this point, plus the civil lawsuits in various places, some of these things are untested legal theories that they're literally trying to find a way to prove. And that's why the Supreme Court's having to intervene. That's why you were talking about the immunity clause. All of these things are not settled law. They're all having to be argued. Well, okay, even some. Let's just take some.
Maybe some.
Let's take some.
But he still defied a subpoena for a year. I mean, he still had these classified documents at Mar-a-Lago.
Again, all of that are facts to be proven yet still in the court of law. These are the allegations, right? So let's just leave the allegations of allegations.
I know you're innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, and I believe that.
I get that, but I'm just arguing you use the term effective.
Yeah.
I don't think January 6th was a very effective day in a positive way.
You threw in another subject. I haven't got through the last 7.
Go ahead, this is my ADD, my friend. I apologize. Go ahead.
Listen, on my show, I always say I take Pollack show tangents because I'll be like, oh, look, a butterfly, and I'll talk about something for 15 minutes. I try to get back to it. No, you're good, man. I'm having fun. But let's start with the wall, right?
Sure.
So he said, I'm going to build the wall and make Mexico pay for it.
Right.
Now, whether he intended on really having Mexico pay for it or whether he meant that, anecdotally, I don't know. The reality is, though, and I think most Americans agree, and let's start with that prospect. Because I heard you with the last call and you were saying all Republicans aren't bad. We all kind of want the same things. I heard you saying that there is room for everybody to kind of agree.
I don't know if we all want the same things.
I'm overgeneralizing.
Yeah.
But the point I'm getting at is, I think if you had to poll America on whether or not they think there's a problem at the border, I think most Americans would say, yes, there's a problem at the border. Now, how to handle that, we might disagree.
I agree with you 150%, but this is my issue with Republicans when it comes to this issue.
Yeah.
We might have more numbers of people crossing the border illegally now, more than we've had in several years past. I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. But when I hear a lot of MAGA Republicans, they only want to blame Joe Biden for it. Now, listen, it's not a Republican problem.
Oh, I blame Republicans. I'm a MAGA Republican who blames Republicans.
I blame both. No, I hear you. But I blame both. This is an issue we've had at the border for a long time. I'm for border security. I want border security. But a lot of these MAGA Republicans will only blame Joe Biden, just like the fentanyl and the drug issues. We had over 300,000 people that sadly died of drug overdoses under the Trump administration. I don't blame Donald Trump for that. It's a Republican problem and a Democrat problem. And I just can't stand it when we just blame one side of the aisle for our issues at the border.
I agree with you. We're agreeing. See, look, we start right off the bat agreeing with one another. One of the bad Republicans, because here's the deal. I blame Republicans for the border. I've complimented Nancy Pelosi and I compliment the Democrats. Now, I disagree with their policies, but they're effective. When a Democrat votes for a Democrat, you guys can have the majority. Well, you're an independent, so it's not you guys. Democrats can have the majority by 1 seat. And they can accomplish almost every single one of their policy objectives, even if they don't have the Senate or the White House. They did this very effectively in the second half of Trump's first term. They don't need the majority to get what they want done because you know what they're unified. Republicans are a freaking mess. I mean, they can't agree on anything right now.
I agree, but I go back to what I said earlier. You said Donald Trump effective. He lost the House. He lost the Senate. He lost the 2020 election. I don't
think he did. Well, he did. No, let me say this. I'm not blaming him for all of those losses. There's a lot of factors that go into that. It would be too easy to oversimplify it. The Republican Party has a problem right now, and it goes to the reason. And I know I have to touch on the 6 other things you mentioned, so I'm doing the ADD thing with you. The Republican Party has a problem right now, and this is why I like Donald Trump. It's why I actually support Donald Trump wholeheartedly, and it's the same reason why I did in 2016. The same reason why libertarians and far left individuals supported Bernie Sanders is the same reason why many people support Donald Trump. It's not, and then going back to what you mentioned, it's not that he said something about John McCain that people found offensive. It's the fact that the Republicans hate and fear Donald Trump, I think, more than the left and Democrats do.
So then they're two-faced and phony then.
100%. So I say this.
That's not a good thing. You're admitting that most of the Republican, and by the way, I agree with you, is fake and phony.
Listen, I'm at war with Democrats. I mean, with Republicans, just like I am with other. Here's the deal. I'm an American. I'm an America first American. When I say that, I do believe in putting America first. And that means putting us above foreign wars, putting us above foreign interests. I think we got to take care of our own. And when we have veterans without health care, and we have people dying of fentanyl, when we have communities in poverty with crime, that's where $1 billion that are earmarked for Ukraine should go first. I'm sorry. Yes, I care that Russia's invading a foreign country. But you know what? I care about the people getting shot in Chicago, not in Kiev.
I don't disagree with you there either. But again, the point that I would make is, how is Donald Trump the Lord and Savior for that?
I didn't say he's the Lord and Savior. So now, to be clear, what Donald Trump represents to me, and he represents to a lot of Americans, and the reason why he's doing so well now. Now, think about this. You mentioned it correctly. 96 indictments. He says mean things. He's upsetting
91 felonies. Yep.
Right. I don't know if all of 91 are felonies, but they're indictments nonetheless. But either way,
91 4 indictments, 91 felonies.
Call them 3,406. It doesn't matter. The point is, even though he's facing the indictments, now if you look at the exit polls from Iowa, over 60% of the people who turned out in Iowa, the Republicans, said it didn't even matter if he was convicted. They would still
right. Well, I think they're idiots.
Well, I'm just pointing out.
By the way, 2/3 of those voters also think Donald Trump won the 2020 election. So I don't take any credence with people that are idiots.
So we'll get to that one. No, we'll get to that one because that is a whole show. Okay. But here's the deal. There's a reason why Donald Trump is doing better. I mean, look, you have Nikki Haley as an option if you're a Republican. You have Ron DeSantis. You had Asa Hutchinson if you wanted. You had Chris Christie if you wanted. All of them hate Trump just as much as other people, right? You have them as options. But for some reason, Donald Trump is winning by historic margins so far, at least in Iowa. He looks like he's going to do well in New Hampshire and then even to South Carolina. Where
you think it's historic, though, when only 14% of registered Republicans voted and 7% of those of all registered Republicans in Iowa voted for Trump? Do you look at that as historic? I know some people do.
You can splice that up and divide it out. However, the largest margin of victory in Iowa was in 1988.
Oh, he's got support.
So I'm just saying, if we can just go to 1988 was the last time somebody did better than 13 points. He did.
He's got support. 30. I'm not going to sit here and say that Biden's going to win in a landslide. No, he's got support. I agree with you 150%, and I'm concerned. But I guess and I know there's a lot of things we haven't touched on yet, but it goes back to my first question, which is, I don't know how anybody who is a veteran, no matter how much you hate Joe Biden, you hate Democrats, you hate their policies, with all the rhetoric and a guy that dodged the military multiple times. Donald Trump did do that. And here's a guy with the things he said about our military. I don't know how anybody who has served could support this man. I don't get it.
So I know a lot of military guys, and I don't think I've spoken to a single one. I'm sure you have. We have different audiences, so I'm sure you have spoken to veterans that dislike President Trump.
I've spoken to both.
Yeah, but the majority of the veterans that I've spoken, I would say all, but I don't want to be overgeneralize. I'm sure I know a veteran didn't like Trump, but the idea is comparing Joe Biden to Donald Trump. The veterans I speak to feel like Donald Trump respected the military more than Joe Biden. You remember the famous "I'm looking at my watch" moment when the soldiers were being brought off that aircraft. Do you remember this? Joe Biden was caught looking at his wristwatch.
I do. Do you think that's comparable with somebody that just looked at their watch to see what time it is, to all the statements that Donald Trump has made about veterans? I don't respect John McCain because he was captured, a guy who dodged the military.
He was very angry at John McCain.
I think that's a very, with all due respect, I think that's a very unfair analogy that you're trying to make in saying, well, look at what Joe Biden did. He looked at his watch. I could give you a laundry list of things.
That was just one example. What I'm saying is our military doesn't, and I actually had a Navy SEAL on my show last night with Matt Couch, the Pollack and Couch show. His name's Clark. I can't think of his last name. He has a cool Italian last name. But anyway, he was on the show. He was part of SEAL Team 5. And the reason why we had him on, because there's 2 missing Navy SEALs right now that fell off when they were trying to board. Actually, one fell off, the other one went after him.
Right.
They're still missing. And when asked about it, nobody's giving any information. And now maybe it's to protect the operation. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that. But when I had him on the show and I was talking to him about that, and he said, we just don't feel supported by President Biden. We don't feel like he has our backs. I feel like he's more interested in DEI stuff rather than military attention. And he also accurately pointed out that recruitment is at all-time low. Special forces interest is at all-time. We have an issue in the military, and it seems that our focus isn't in the right place. Our soldiers are saying that they don't feel supported by President Biden. Now, I don't know why that is. I don't think
I would want to pick their brain and speak to them about that.
Yeah.
But I will say that and this not really changing the subject, but sort of is. There are a lot of Republicans out there that don't think transgenders should serve in the military. Is that supporting the military?
I don't know. If there is I mean, it wasn't too long ago that Democrats supported Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what goes into if there's operational reasons to you know what Clark said last night that was real interesting. He says, look, when we're fighting, I don't care who somebody goes to bed with at night, what they do in their personal lives. He says, we have each other's backs and we're there to die for each other if
I
necessary.
wish everybody had that attitude. Unfortunately, there's a lot of MAGA Republicans who don't feel that way, and even policy members that believe they care more about what's between your legs than serving this country honorably. Listen, I'm sure there are plenty. Yeah. There are veterans out there that don't like Joe Biden. They're lifelong Republicans. They claim they don't feel supported. I love to hear from them and talk to them, especially if they serve this country honorably. It's just a guy that dodged the military multiple times, and you look at his history and the things that he has said and his behavior, and I guess that's where I question it. I don't think he's very effective. I think he's very effective maybe at lying, at manipulating the media. And let me ask you this: 2020, who won? Is Joe Biden a free and fair elected?
Well, Joe Biden won. Clearly, he's in the White House.
Is he a free and fair elected president?
So that's where it gets interesting. Free and fair elected. Yes, he won a free, fair, and open election. He won, and he's in the White House. He was sworn in. The election in 2020 has not been overturned, and there hasn't been enough fraud identified. Whether or not it's been identified, nothing has been presented to a court of competent, jurisdiction.
And why does your guy? Why does your guy keep lying about it? Why does he keep lying?
Here's the interesting thing, and this is going to be a problem going forward in 24 and 26, 28, and for all of perpetuity that we have a republic. People legit, and again, if you look at polling, I already told you there are a majority of people, Republicans, and actually, I would bet if you polled all Americans to whether or not they think there were inconsistencies or they had any doubts, not who won, because that's where it starts to get muddy when you say who won the election.
Well, there's a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, there's
but there was also election irregularities, and this is something that we have to address, because if any American,
what election irregularities are you referring to?
I mean, you can go state by state. When you have polling in 6 different swing states on election night, when you have polling station, and again, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? So we have an unprecedented vote by mail. So inevitably there's going to be issues, because now we're voting in a whole new way we've never had so many.
Right, but there's a difference between issues and widespread voter fraud that could have overturned the outcome of the election.
But so now take what happened on election night, right? Okay. I think we're all watching the same election probably around 11 o'clock at night, and we look, Donald Trump's doing well. He's starting to win in some of these states. And then in the remaining swing states that had to win, one after the other, the chips started falling. Fulton County had a water issue and they had to stop counting.
Right. Well,
then in Michigan, they had some kind of issue. I don't remember what it was. They had to stop counting. And then when they resumed counting, the votes came in that were completely favoring Joe Biden versus
because Donald Trump told his supporters not to mail in ballot. I mean, that's a pretty simple explanation.
I'm not going to argue with you on that. What I'm saying is maybe that is the reason. Maybe that is the reason.
Well, it is. Yeah, it is.
But what I'm telling you is, and there's been a lot of, and I'm not involved in election integrity, so I can't speak intelligently on any efforts that might have been done, across the country. I know some people have been looking at things in Arizona. I know Georgia has. Right. I don't know enough about it. I've never gotten too deep into the election integrity stuff. That being said, I think it's an issue for America that people don't trust the outcome of an election.
Let me ask you,
and I think there's more fault than just Donald Trump on that. Remember,
but I don't think it's that people don't trust it. I think it's the MAGA supporters that are uneducated.
No, it's not just them, because you got to go back to 2016.
Here's why. Let's go back to that. That was my next question.
Yeah.
Before the 2016 election. No, perfect segue.
Yeah.
Donald Trump was saying before the 2016 election that Hillary was going to rig the election. The Democrats were going to rig the election, and it was going to be stolen. And then something happened.
Before 2016? I don't remember that being a narrative.
Yes, he did. I could show you the quotes.
I remember the Russia narrative after the election, and I remember Hillary Clinton saying that Donald Trump wasn't an illegitimate president because of Russian interference.
I will talk about that, but let me start. But first of all, Hillary Clinton conceded the next day. But before the 2016 election, he was saying that Democrats are going to cheat and that the election was going to be rigged. Multiple times he made that statement, and then all of a sudden he won, and Hillary conceded the next day. Now, there was Russian interference in the Mueller report, not enough to rise to the level, of a crime. But with that being said, I don't think that changed the outcome of the 2016 election. Trump won. And then for the next 3 years after Trump won, I guess everything must have gone well because I didn't hear anything about election integrity. I didn't hear anything about an election being stolen. And then we heard it before the 2020 election again. And then we had something called January 6th. And to me, that's not effective. That's a liar. I think Trump is a liar. I don't think I know it. He's despicable. He lies and he does things to make himself look better. He can't admit that he lost. He never wanted to leave the White House. He's still lying about the 2020 election today. He said that he wants to rip up parts of the Constitution. That has to bother you, David. You're an attorney. He wants to rip up parts of the Constitution. That's not a threat to our democracy.
That comment to rip up the Constitution was taken out of context. But Nancy Pelosi, speaking of ripping up things, she stood behind Donald Trump and ripped up his State of the Union speech and threw it in the air when she was done.
While I don't agree with that behavior, that doesn't mean that she's a threat to our democracy because she pulls a stunt.
I don't think Donald Trump is a threat to the democracy. And I think Kamala Harris saying that, I think is dangerous to our. You want to talk about what a threat to the democracy is? Having the vice president of the United States say that a candidate for president is a threat to the democracy. And then should they get elected in just a few months?
You think Kamala Harris is more of a threat to our democracy than Donald Trump because she said Trump is a threat to our democracy?
I think the rhetoric of this, and again, this isn't. I don't want to get into this segue yet, but I think the rhetoric of absolutes destructive to our democracy.
So the rhetoric. I just want to get you right. The rhetoric of our vice president is more harmful to this country than Donald Trump's rhetoric. Let me ask you a question. Does January 6th happen if Donald Trump doesn't say the election was stolen? Does it happen?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think January 6th was a combination of a lot of different things, and a lot of it. I mean, look.
If Donald Trump conceded, does January 6th happen?
Yeah, people still would have been upset. There was
You think January 6th? Come on, David.
I'll give you a perfect example. Weeks before Trump spoke on January 6th, people were already planning what happened concurrently on January 6th. So
weeks before he was saying the election was stolen. He was saying it for weeks, way before January 6th. He said it was rigged and Joe Biden was an illegitimate president. I'm not just talking about that day. I'm talking about weeks before. No. And I'm telling you that I disagree with you in that
that's fine.
Conceded, if Trump just conceded and did what Hillary Clinton did, there would not have been a January 6th. They were there because of him. How do we know that, David? Because the over 1,000 people that were convicted in a court of law, over 50% of them in a court admitted that they were there because of Donald Trump. That's how we know.
Okay. But now, if you get, this is an issue with January 6th. So I didn't pay a lot of attention to January 6th, to be honest with you. I thought it was because it was so divisive. It was so destructive. And I felt like we needed to move forward, not go backwards. I thought we needed to put that behind us. Joe Biden was president. He was sworn in, and we needed to not rehash 2020 and just look forward to 2024. So I wasn't interested in relitigating 2020.
You choose not to be interested in something that's divisive and something that splits the party apart or the country apart.
Let me be clear. I never got into arguing whether or not the cause of January 6th. There's a lot of people who, if you go on Twitter or social media places, people have been talking about January 6th since January 6th happened, about what it could have been, who was involved, who could have been involved, the sentences that were handed down. I kind of just said, I'm not interested, and I just wanted to talk about other things. But then something happened at an event I was at, and I heard from a woman named Jerry Parna, and her I think it was her grandson or her nephew. I forget which. I think it was her grandson. He was he was there on January 6th. He entered the Capitol. He was taking video of it, and then he left. And he was one of the people that got caught up in when the FBI was arresting people. Okay. And he admitted what he did. He said, "Yeah, it's fine." And I don't have the whole story memorized, but I'm just giving you the gist of it. And so everything was fine. And he said, "Look, I'll admit I did what I did." And he thought he was getting charged with one thing. And then he even made like a plea bargain. Like he had the deal all worked out. Like, okay, fine, I'm going to plead to this and, whatever. Then he finds out on the day that he was supposed to, I guess, be sentenced on the things he admitted to, they added terrorism charges. And now he was facing, in this case, I think he was 18 years old or something. Okay. He was young. And then at that point, once all of that happened, he'd already been getting hammered in the press because remember how January 6th was. His family was under stress and Anyway, the long and short of it, he ended up killing himself after finding out he was being charged with terrorism.
And that's terrible. And
Right.
listen,
But
that is
the-
a horrific story. But I
Right.
would also point to the officers who
Yeah.
have committed suicide and killed themselves. The over 140 officers that were injured. Obviously, this 18-year-old, and I don't know the story, and it's very tragic, and I'm sad to hear that. But he should not have been there. And I can't imagine that they would get him on terrorist charges unless he was saying some things on social media.
Well, no, but this is the point I was going to make when you talk about the things people admitted to doing in open court. You said 50%. What they've done in DC, and this is something I think Democrats are interested in this as well, is the way we overcharge people in our criminal justice system. And we don't just, it's not just January 6th, to be clear. This happens in every jurisdiction, in every place around the country. When somebody gets arrested, they charge them with the most they can possibly charge them with to get leverage, to get them admit to a lower crime so they can get a higher prosecution rate or a conviction rate. This happens inequitably in underserved communities too. So this isn't, I'm not just applying this January 6th. So what I'm saying is,
I understand,
to say, well, people said they did this and therefore it's true. I think you have to look at the circumstances of what they were being faced with if they didn't say they did it.
And I understand.
So I understand that people.
I
accepting
understand
what people say in court in a plea deal. That's all I'm saying.
I understand that there are times in this country where people get overcharged. We saw what happened that day. We saw the property that was, we saw people breaking in. We saw officers getting beaten with their own batons. I have no sympathy for those people. If it's an 18-year-old that didn't commit any violent acts,
well, that's the key.
Is there a possibility that maybe this 18-year-old was overcharged? It's tragic that he took his own life. It's also tragic that we had officers that took their own life as well, who did absolutely nothing wrong. And I don't like the rhetoric being put forth by, I know you've said some nice things about Vivek Ramaswamy, who I think is a complete slime ball. He's done this show before. He's a slime ball.
You might not have seen my parody video that I made of him the other day.
I did not. I will check that. I will check that out after, David. But this is a guy that says that it was an inside job, which it wasn't. This is a guy that says Donald Trump won the 2020 election, which he didn't. And the only reason why because I do think he's a smart guy. The only reason why he's doing that is because he wants to work in the Trump administration. And I think that's very, very dangerous. And that's where a lot of the Republican Party is today, afraid to call out Donald Trump for anything. I have respect for Chris Christie. I have respect for Liz Cheney, even though I disagree with her on a lot of policy. I have respect for Mitt Romney. And, when I see these people on the far right that just they kiss the ring of Donald Trump, how can I respect somebody like that, David? I can't.
I understand that. And I've talked to a lot of people. And the funny thing is, and I always try to be reasonable, right? I try to go, let me understand the other person's perspective. Because like I told you when we talked on the phone, I set out to do this media thing because what I learned was, and this happened, I ran for public office actually in 2020, a local office, a nonpartisan seat. I ran for local office. And people would ask me, do you support Trump? That's the very first question. I said, well, it's a nonpartisan race. It doesn't matter. Let's talk about local issues. And that's what really matters. Let's see if we can agree there. Well, no, if you're a Trump supporter, I can't support you and I can't talk to you. And then I would just say, look, yes, I'm supporting President Trump in 2020. Well, how could you do that? Are you a racist? Are you a this? Are you a that? And then the insults would come. And I said, you haven't asked me a single question about a policy. You just made all these assumptions based on the person I'm voting for. You didn't even ask me why.
Right.
And so
I don't agree with that.
I said, yeah. So I said, we have a problem. We need to at least talk to each other. And then I learned that after I started saying, ask me some other questions and let's see if we can get to, how you doing on time, by the way?
Oh, we good. We're good. Yeah. You got a few more minutes. I do as well. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I started saying, look, let's talk about other things and let's see where we can agree. And then we can work on the things we disagree on. Right. And I learned that once we started talking to each other, even people who hated me after I said I supported Trump, we found commonality in other things.
Sure, absolutely.
And the funny thing I noticed is, I was listening to your last caller and I was listening to the things he was saying, the bad Republican conversation, which was fine because if you were listening to a conservative talk radio show, you'd have a caller say the exact same thing from the other side. And that's what I try to combat is, look, we all have our theories and we all have our beliefs. We all have our hatred for one reason or another for whomever. But the thing I try to focus on is that if we're all saying the same thing, just from the opposite perspective, we have to take a step back and ask why.
I agree.
And I think that's where we move forward, though. And I think that's where we have an opportunity.
Here's where I think we can move forward in general terms. You're right. We all have our theories. We all have our opinions. But what I try to tell people is you're entitled to your opinions. You're not entitled to your own facts, right? The earth is not flat. And Donald Trump did not win the 2020 election.
I've had discussions with people who think both. So
of course, Kyrie Irving types. But if we can start with reasonable, what's reasonable? Okay, Joe Biden's too old. Yeah. If it's Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, I'm still going to vote for Joe Biden. I can give you a million reasons why. I want to see somebody younger in there. Democrats are not perfect. I've never said that. At the same time, if we can just start with Donald Trump did not win the 2020 election. Donald Trump is not completely innocent, and this is not all a witch hunt. Some of this is his wrongdoing, and he's probably, I would make a bet with anybody, going to be a convicted felon. Now, he's facing 91 felonies, but part of this is Donald Trump's fault, and he plays the victim to everybody, and he said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and they'll still vote for me. Okay, that's a cult. And when I speak to a Trump supporter, I don't immediately say, oh, you must be a racist. I would never say that because that's a ridiculous statement. There's some, but I would never make that statement. There are some reasonable Republicans out there, even some that, would vote for Donald Trump that I could have good conversations with, like you. But it's hard for me to have a conversation with a Republican who says Trump won, and this is all George Soros, all these indictments. I'm sure some of it is political, but you can't claim that Donald Trump is completely innocent and he did nothing wrong either. If I could at least start there with a MAGA Republican, then I think it's fair to have a conversation.
Man, let me tell you, I would like to try to meet you halfway there. My perspective is these indictments are troubling to me. Look, anybody who could be charged with something has some responsibility in being able to be charged with it. Yep. The thing is, you can get pulled over. Maybe you've had a beer or two. And everybody always says 2 beers, by the way. If you're drunk, have you ever watched these cop shows? They always had 2 beers. So if you're drunk, just either admit it or don't say you had any. Why stop at 2? Anyway, but if you get pulled over, see those tangents? Depending on the officer, they're either going to take you to jail or they're going to call somebody to come pick you up. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. Maybe
David, you're an attorney. You would never defy a subpoena for a year, would you? That's what Donald Trump did.
But now Donald Trump has lawyers, and if he was advised that he could,
pretty bad lawyers if they advised him to.
But I'm just saying, there's a lot of, you talk about facts. There's a lot of facts that have yet to be proven, and the only place you prove facts are in the courts.
But why is it always, well, his lawyers told him to do that, or I think that was taken out of context? I mean, I don't know. I just feel like a lot of people make excuses for Donald Trump's behavior, and it's frustrating to me. And well, when we talk about how, some people will say how tough he was on China, why is it that nobody puts any responsibility on Donald Trump for COVID? I mean, I'm not blaming Donald Trump for COVID, but if he was so tough on China and they respected him so much, why was COVID made in China during the Trump administration?
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, but I never hear anything that happens under the Biden administration. It must have been Joe Biden's fault. The war in the Ukraine, for example. Oh, Donald Trump, that would have never happened under Donald Trump. What about COVID? We had a global pandemic. It happened under Trump. I don't blame Donald Trump for that, but I blame him for his response. It's going to be gone by Easter, 15 cases down to 0. Inject yourself with disinfectant. To me, that's not effective.
Well, Now let's be fair. COVID, it's funny because the Ron DeSantis people hit Trump for COVID as well. And look, I'm a radio guy. If you tell me how much time I have and I'll wrap it.
No, we got about 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Cool.
Yep.
DeSantis people hit Trump for COVID too. It's so funny,
right?
Because DeSantis people hit Trump for COVID. They say he locked states down. They talked about the
governors did that. The governors.
I agree. I know the governors did it.
Right.
But what I'm telling you is it's funny because I talked to DeSantis. Well, I don't talk. I listen to him. But I listen to the DeSantis people, and they say, and they hate Trump because they think his COVID response was too effective according to the left standards, because he rushed to market a vaccine in Operation Warp Speed, a vaccine that they hate. Trump got a lot of crap when he told people they should take the vaccine, by the way. Trump took the vaccine himself, by the way.
And then he took the vaccine in private, and now so many MAGA Republicans say the vaccine is poison.
He told people to take
the vaccine. He did. I know he did. But
now,
I know.
But now let's go back, though, to COVID. And I had this conversation last night with somebody. First of all, he called it the China virus, funny enough. But it did come from China, whether it came in a lab or a wet market, doesn't matter. It originated in China. And there was this effort to, for some reason, to kind of absolve China of the responsibility of having this virus originate in China and not tell anybody about it. And reports keep coming about that actually knew way ahead of time when they could have warned people and they didn't. But that's a China issue. We could deal with that diplomatically later. But the thing is, when COVID first came out, you have to remember Europe. They were really bad off, especially a lot of the elderly populations. They were dying. They were running out of ventilators. Trump started producing ventilators in the United States, so much so that we had enough ventilators here and we started exporting them. And then he put in.
Well, listen, let me stop by saying this.
Yeah.
I never blamed Donald Trump for COVID. I don't think
Sure.
his response to it was very good. Per capita, when you look at the deaths we had in this country to other countries around the world, inexcusable. I don't just blame Donald Trump for that. I don't understand why it became political. I don't know why the vaccines became political. If you listen to conservative talk radio, some of those right-wing talk show hosts, people are dead now. I don't wish that upon anybody, but they were anti-vaccine. This should have never been political. And I don't know why so many people made it political, and some people on the left made it political too.
But that's the issue. It was made political.
Well, it shouldn't have. It shouldn't have been. And listen, I'll take Dr. Fauci's not perfect, right? Clearly, mistakes were made. But I'll take an infectious disease expert with 40 years of experience over Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity or some right-wing buffoon. With all due respect, I'm not talking about you, who has zero medical experience. Fauci's not perfect. No doctor is perfect. But, there are people out there that still think COVID was a hoax and millions of people are dying from the vaccine. It's medical misinformation, and much of it is coming from the far right.
Well, I think there's a little bit of all of it, and I think there are some people having adverse effects to the vaccine. That's true, and
every vaccine.
No, that's true. Yeah. But you talk about the politics of it. For the longest time, they were denying it because they wanted people to take it, and so you got to look at where sometimes.
What do you mean what do you mean they were denying it?
They were not admitting the adverse impacts from the vaccine. There's like, oh yeah, but don't worry. And then remember when the Johnson & Johnson vaccine had to get taken off the market because of blood clots? But before that, they were like, in order to get people to take the vaccine, they were not paying it. They were purposely avoiding talking about the unpopular things and trying to encourage. Remember the eating French fries and a cheeseburger in New York? You should take the vaccine when people had serious concerns. And it's not just Republicans.
I remember that, but there's a reason why they did that. And I hope
because they thought. And I'll give them the benefit of it. They thought it was going to save lives.
You don't think the vaccine saved any lives?
I think there were the benefits of the vaccine was overpromised in hopes that it would. But I don't think in the end it was as effective as we were told it would be.
Well, I think if you look at just about every study that's out there, John Hopkins and many other studies, it would show that if you were vaccinated, you were 10 times less likely to die of COVID or be in the ICU. I would call that pretty effective. There's always going to be adverse effects. Yes, you can get COVID and give it to other people if you're vaccinated, but half the world took it. So let's just admit it right now. While there's going to be some adverse effects, overwhelmingly, the vaccines were very safe. And when you look at across the board, after the vaccines were available, much higher percentage of people that were dying, sadly, and that were in the ICU were people that were unvaccinated. I mean, I think that's the whole story here. To me,
but that shifted. Don't forget. I mean, there was a time when they called it the pandemic of the unvaccinated. They convinced people to turn on their neighbors if they weren't getting vaccinated. They basically said,
"Well, that's not right. That's not right. I don't condone that."
But they did. I mean,
I can't speak to some idiots out there that were making statements like that. The point
but this goes to your point where you said politics got involved, but that's how.
Sure.
They used politics to coerce people in a healthcare decision. And this is a bigger problem now because now in 2024 now, holy crap. Now in 2024, people don't trust their healthcare providers anymore. I mean, you had people, everybody, not just Democrats. If you're a Democrat and you go to your provider and they maybe were one of these people who said, yeah, I don't think you know if you should take the vaccine, or maybe they didn't wear a mask. On the left, you'd be like, that's not my doctor anymore. That person's going to kill me. And then if you're on the right and you go to a doctor and they wore a mask and said, I think you should get this vaccine. And they're like, no. And they're like, well, I'm not going to treat you if you don't. That's not my doctor. So now even our healthcare has become politicized. And so now
I've always said that the vaccine should not have been mandated. I've also said that you should listen to your personal physician and then make your own decision. If people want to wear masks, they can wear masks. But if you're a private business, you have the right to tell somebody to wear a mask.
Well, why wasn't that the narrative? It should have been.
Well, I mean, I've always felt that way. That's always been my personal opinion. But we only got a couple more minutes left here, David, and I really do appreciate your time. I think it's a really good discussion. If Donald Trump is a convicted felon, I don't know if it's 1 felony or 91 felonies.
Right.
Will you still support him no matter how many felonies he's convicted of over Joe Biden?
Over Joe Biden, I would support Donald Trump regardless of how many felonies he would be convicted of.
There's a lot of people that share that opinion.
And the Constitution actually doesn't even preclude him from becoming president with those felony convictions.
Right, which I disagree with. But listen, I know that you're not alone. Does it bother you at all that A jury has already found him a liable sexual abuser. The judge characterized it as rape. I do as well.
It was a civil case, and it wasn't rape, even though that's as being characterized. It was a civil penalty, but it wasn't. Rape is a criminal charge.
In that state, you are 100% correct. However, I think there's a lot of people that would characterize, without getting too graphic, penetration with one's fingers as rape.
But that's what he was accused of.
And that's what
remember the standard but in a civil case, the standard, the burden of proof is much lower, which is why it's not a rape. Listen, if that actually, let me tell you this, if there was evidence that happened criminally, he would be in jail for that. But there isn't enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to charge him on that. So therefore, they went the civil route, which means the evidence was weaker.
Say the same thing about OJ. Would you say the same thing about OJ Simpson? Because he was found
not guilty.
Right, but he was found liable of the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman.
Right. So so they got money because
and she's getting money.
Right. From a preponderant, I think the standard probably there is clear and convincing. But on a clear and convincing standard, which is like more likely than not, 51, 50, 49. There's civil penalties because you prevented enough evidence to suggest, okay, maybe it happened.
Okay,
but I won't say that OJ is a murderer because he wasn't convicted of that in a criminal.
Well, I think he's a murderer. I'll say it.
But that's fine.
I understand your attorney, and I do think. Do you think it's just a coincidence that 25 plus women have also accused Donald Trump of sexual assault or rape, including his ex-wife in court documents, or do you not believe them either?
It's not whether or not I believe them. It's not whether or not I don't know. I haven't read the reports. I haven't scrutinized them. I haven't had the benefit of any contradictory evidence. A lot of people accuse a lot of people of things. People have accused Bill Clinton of rape. People have accused everybody of everything. I mean, Brett Kavanaugh is a perfect example of accusations being made. When you're a high-profile person, people say things. I'm not going to say whether or not I believe somebody or don't. I don't know. I'm not.
Why is it that nobody has ever accused Barack Obama of rape?
Why think Barack Obama murdered his chef who was
okay? Well, that's absurd. Well,
I'm just saying, people say things about
Why
everybody.
Is it that we didn't see Barack Obama on Epstein Island or hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein, but we've seen it with Donald Trump, Bill Clinton as well? Why is it that Joe
apparently
Biden?
Donald Trump wasn't the court? What I've seen is that Donald Trump wasn't on Epstein Island.
I understand that.
From
We've
that.
seen pictures with Jeffrey Epstein. Why?
Well, of course, he knows Jeffrey Epstein.
Right, they're friends.
It doesn't mean he was on Epstein Island or did anything.
I'm not saying. All I'm saying is we didn't see Barack Obama hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. We didn't see Joe Biden.
Maybe he's better at covering his tracks. I'm just saying.
All right. Hey, I'm just saying. Hey, listen, let me end by saying this. I really appreciate anybody that's willing to come on the show that I disagree with on some things. Clearly we but willing to have a respectful conversation, which we did. And I really do appreciate that. Before I let you go, can you please share with my audience out there how people can follow your show, which I believe is Monday through Friday, right?
Well, I got my show, the David Pollack show is on Mondays. It airs in Orlando locally, and then it's all over the internet. And you can stream it any of your favorite places, the David Pollack show. And then on Wednesday, Matt Couch and I have the Pollack and Couch show. And then on Friday, I usually join him on his show, Matt After Dark. So I try to be everywhere all the time and come on shows like this. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy having these conversations.
And I listen to your spaces, and they're very, very good.
I do Twitter spaces too.
Yeah, man, I listen to your spaces. They're really good. You're welcome to come back on the show again anytime, and I'd be happy to do your show anytime as well.
It'd be fun.
And I appreciate you taking the opportunity, David. I really do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Appreciate it. Thanks, David. All right, that's David Pollack, everybody. Listen, we're not always going to agree on everything, but it is possible to have respectful conversations with people, even though you might disagree with them on a number of issues. And that's a perfect example of that. I want to remind everybody on the Occupy Democrats Network that are watching, click that subscribe button there. It's only $5 a month, and you'll get extra content from me. We're going to do an extra show tomorrow, every Friday, just with the subscribers. So click that subscribe button. You can also follow me on my socials, at PTL Radio Show. You can find all my stuff on YouTube, at PTL Radio Show on X, formerly known as Twitter. And I'm also on TikTok. So I'm everywhere. I really appreciate both of my guests today. Keith Boykins is awesome, advisor for the Bill Clinton administration. And of course, David Pollack, who just joined us. Very interesting conversation, to say the least. And I do appreciate him taking the time to join us as well. And I appreciate all of you. Thanks, everybody out there, for tuning in to Pushing the Limits. I appreciate all of you very much. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a great day, everybody.